to seminary, let me think this. When I first became a Christian, I didn't really think much about the saints. The saints to me seemed like people like St. Francis or St. Patrick or St. Joseph, people who lived a long, long time ago, who did sort of maybe amazing or miraculous things, and they didn't seem to have much to say to me in my own life. Right? That's people who are holy and special and set apart in some sort of way. But while I was in seminary, we were in chapel one day, and the seminary is quite old. The buildings date back like this one to the 1800s, and kind of like our church, but more so, there were brass plaques all along the walls, various memorials to different people through time. And while I was sitting in chapel, I looked over at one of the plaques, and it was a plaque to the Martyrs of New Guinea. Now, the Martyrs of New Guinea are a number of Christian missionaries who were executed by the Japanese at the beginning of World War II when they invaded the island of New Guinea, which is just north of Australia. And the thing is that a lot of the missionaries were offered the opportunity to leave, that the Allies, before they sort of retreated, offered to take the missionaries with them. And most of them chose to stay behind to continue to be with the people that they had felt called to serve. And there were hundreds of these people who were executed. And I actually never even heard of the Martyrs of New Guinea, let alone knew anything about them. But what really struck me about this plaque about the Martyrs of New Guinea is that it listed the name of someone who had been a student at the seminary. They had just graduated a year or two before they went away. And I thought about that, about how that person's life was so much like my own. Right? That he had worshipped in this same chapel in which I was worshiping. He had probably sat in the same classrooms that I sat in. He had walked the same city streets that I walked. That his life was so much like my own and yet so different. And I can imagine how excited he was about this call to be a missionary in New Guinea, how exciting it was to go to the South Pacific, probably like on a big ship or maybe one of those flying boat planes. That would have been really cool, right? And he's so excited that he gets to go to the South Pacific, and what an adventure he was going on. And yet it turned so tragic at the end, and yet he chose to stay and be faithful. And that really struck me. It was the first time I really began to think about people who are saints, about how their martyrdom or whatever it is that makes them be called out in some sort of way comes upon them in unexpected ways. He didn't go to New Guinea hoping to be a martyr. He went to New Guinea on an adventure and hoping to bring people of Christ and to share the good news of the gospel. And then later on, I heard about a guy named Jonathan Daniels, which some of you may have heard of. He was an Episcopal seminarian. And in the mid-1960s, he went down and was one of those freedom riders in the civil rights struggle. And he was in Alabama. And while there in Alabama causing some good trouble, he got arrested. And he was in jail for a couple of days. They finally let him out. And as they were walking through this little town in Alabama, they were going to go to the little mom and pop to get a Coke. A couple of the kids from the local families, especially a young woman named Ruby Sales, who was like a 12-year-old African-American girl. She sort of joined the group, the three that had been released from jail, as they're walking down the street. And as they go into the store, a man in the store comes out with a shotgun. And he aims it at young Ruby Sales, a 12-year-old girl, and pulls the trigger. And Jonathan Daniels jumped in front of her and took the shot to his chest and, of course, died instantly. And what really strikes me about this is that Ruby Sales, you can follow her on Facebook. This is not something that happened in an unimaginable past in some faraway place that we've forgotten. This is someone who is alive today, who still speaks up for justice and truth today, whose life was changed by the actions of a young man who took a shot aimed at her. And so it occurred to me that the saints aren't people who are special, and they aren't people who are holy, and they aren't people who are better or really even different from you and I. They are people who, in the moment when things seem darkest, stayed fast to their faith, who stayed true to the invitation of Jesus to walk with those who are oppressed and set down, to those who are in need, to serve others with love and compassion, fearlessly. And when we look at our gospel reading today, on one level, Jesus is sort of talking about his return, the end of the age, and about how that time will come unexpectedly. We won't be ready for it. And yet Jesus tells us that they'll always be prepared. Kind of like a Boy Scout, I guess. To be steady in faith, because you don't know when that time is coming. But at the same time, I think Jesus is also talking about how in all of our lives, in every generation, there are times that are troubled and difficult, when we don't know how we can face up to it. And Jesus reminds us that though there is one end of the age, that the troubles and the turmoils and the wars and the conflicts will come in every life. And that they are opportunities for us to stand up for Jesus, to stand up for our faith, to love boldly and courageously. And so it occurred to me that that's really who the saints were. They were people in their generations who, when the time came, when there was uncertainty, when there were temptations to be quiet, to not make a ruckus, to not cause trouble, they ignored that and stayed true to the gospel of Jesus. And that's what Jesus is inviting us into here. And the gift that Jesus offers us is hope. Hope. It's a powerful, powerful thing, hope. It's the only engine of change that we have ever really known. Because hope allows us to imagine a world that is different than the one in which we live. That the possibility that the things that cause us trouble and strife and difficulty can be overcome. Hope. It's this great gift that powers the imagination. And when we combine it with faith in the promises of Jesus Christ, then it's the thing that gives us the courage to stand up, the courage to not be complicit or quiet, the courage to look around us and see a world that's hurting, a world in need, a world where people are weighed down by the difficulties and challenges of life, and to offer our hand to them, to offer ourselves to them, to be bold and courageous and loving, to love those who are difficult to love, to serve those who may not feel appreciative, but to do it anyway, because it's what Jesus asks of us. As we enter into this season of Advent, on this first Sunday of Advent, we are called to remember the power of hope. The power of hope to keep us loving. The power to keep us confident in the promises that Jesus has offered us. The power to help us to see that in the life of Jesus, we have the model for our own life. And that if we can be like Jesus and hold on to hope in the moments that are the darkest and the most fearful, then the power of God to change the world, to transform it in the name of love, is an unimaginable power. And each of us is called in our lives to be a saint. Hopefully none of us are called to be a martyr, but all of us are called to be people who hold fast to the love of Jesus and to share that love into the world so that those who are beat down or oppressed or left out might also learn the power of hope in their own lives. Amen.
Amen.